You are listening to a Difference for One podcast, episode number 34.
I'm Michelle.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Cherise.
And I'm Cami.
We are the English sisters.
We come together to share life-changing methods of improvement through a variety of topics.
We hope that above all, these discussions will help you feel that Jesus Christ is making a difference for you, the one. And we also hope that our podcast will inspire you to find simple ways that you can make a difference for one.
Hello, everyone. This is Cherise, and I am here with a special guest, Yve Dizes, and I'm really excited to talk with her today. We are going to be talking about healing from past trauma, but this is the part 2 episode, and we're going to really get into depth and apply some tools so that you can have the knowledge that you need to go forward in your life with joy and with ease. So, Yve, will you introduce yourself for us, please?
Yeah, thank you, Cherise. It's so lovely to be here, and I love this idea, and I can't wait to hear the part 1, and I hope that my part 2 will do it justice. So my name, as you said, is Yve Dizes, and I am the spiritual concierge. And so what I do really is in the same way that a concierge of a building or hotel is responsible for all of the tenants and helping them to have a life of joy and ease and abundance, I do that for people spiritually. So I help them determine what areas of their life might need a little extra care, or how they can take the areas where they're already very successful and break that down to understand the patterns and use it moving forward. So anytime that we look at how we move forward into the future, a lot of times what we do first is we look back to the past. And so a lot of my work really is in helping people heal from past traumas.
We'll be back after this quick break with a message from our sponsors.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited about this. You're just the perfect person to talk with about this, because trauma is something that everybody relates to, everybody experiences. I mean, we all have our ups and our downs and our ebbs and flows in life. Is this something that everybody experiences in their life? Do most people have it just a little bit, a lot? What goes on in the body physiologically when trials or trauma happens, or trials happen to then create trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it does seem like everybody has trauma to some extent. You know, I think that when we look at the word trauma, we have to understand that obviously the word has a really huge significance when we talk about certain things like sexual abuse or experiencing violence or terrorism or, you know, those kind of traumas, right? Which is what we kind of think of. We think of traumas like as these really huge, lots of blood, lots of immediate repercussions. But in actuality, on a biological, physiological level, trauma is anything that creates a response in our brain and our body that says, oh my gosh, something's really wrong right now. And that can, for a young child, you know, that can be something as seemingly insignificant as parents fighting over the child, right? Not even at the child, just over the child. So we have this really interesting sort of realization in these recent years where we realize that, yes, we are actually all exposed to trauma at a pretty young age. Some of it obviously much more severe than others. And furthermore, what's really fascinating is when you start to dive into the research, you see that not only do we have our own traumas, but we actually carry trauma from our parents in our RNA and our DNA. So basically, we kind of walk around with these little ticking time bombs of trauma that can be set off at any moment that we just inherit from our parents. In a spiritual sense, we talk about family karmas, or we talk about healing family wounds or family cycles. And what's interesting is that now we're starting to see that in a very real way, that's actually true, because we do carry some of these ancestral karmas, these ancestral traumas in our DNA and our RNA. On a physiological level, trauma is any time that the stressors activate the sensors in the thalamus, and then the thalamus basically lights up the amygdala, and the amygdala is really the area of the brain where fear lives. So as soon as that's triggered, you know, you get cortisol, you get all of these intense adrenaline, you get all of these hormones and chemicals flood the body, and that's a trauma at the most basic level.
I love that because that's exactly what I called in the first episode survival mode. Our adrenaline rushes and our body goes into that survival mode, and some of the systems in the body completely stop because they're not necessary for survival, like the reproductive system or the digestive system. Like when I'm stressed out, my gut just stops because it's not necessary for my survival. And I'm stressed because my body thinks it's afraid and it's thinking that, okay, something really intense is going on and I need to take care of it right now, and I need to get all that adrenaline and the cortisol and all that energy into fixing that problem. So as kids, like we're dealing with all of this all at once. Like that's got to be a lot for a little kid to handle. And then somebody who's an adult and they don't even know how to heal from that. What do we do? Because that is so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And not all traumas are created equal, and not all amygdalas are created equal, right? So for some of us, we just biologically are a little bit better equipped to handle that. And you're not a superhuman. It's just luck of the draw, really. Just depends exactly where and how fast your amygdala develops. In general, amygdalas are not completely formed until we're about 25. So traumas that happen earlier in life are going to be a little bit more long lasting. They're going to have a little bit more of that PTSD sort of after response. I think one of the first things that I like to work with, and I know Cherise, you'll relate to this being an energy healer yourself, is really when I work with past traumas, I always start at the energy level. And this is so important because when I see a client who's actively dealing with a trauma, and sometimes even when they don't actively deal with them, you see that in the root chakra. So you see that at the sort of gathering of energy at the base of the body.
Just to clarify, base of the body meaning the base of the spine. So not at the feet, but the base of the spine. All the chakras in the body are starting at the tailbone and ending at the head.
At the tip of the tailbone, essentially, is what we call the root chakra. The root chakra is said to be the source and the control of fear and our sense of connection with the earth. So when we're in fear or we have a trauma around our actual safety or security, we see that wound in that area of the body, energetically speaking. I love that you mentioned, the reproductive system shuts down, the digestive system shuts down. And we actually see that in the energy too. It's amazing. Like you can see that energetically close off as well. The first step for me and for my clients a lot of times is just an energetic awareness of the fact that trauma is moving through your energy body. And the hard thing about that is that not everybody feels innately connected to energy. And that's okay, because the good thing about it is that you don't have to be. Right? You don't even have to believe it. You can totally disbelieve everything I'm saying. You can be like, chakra, that's not a thing. And it doesn't matter, because if you do the visualizations, it will help you anyways. And that's the amazing thing about energy work to me, right? Is that you don't have to believe. It works better if you believe, right? Because scientifically, we know that the placebo effect is very powerful. But even if you don't believe, when I take my clients through these chakra meditations to help target that area, release the tension there, almost every single time they see a dramatic improvement right away. So for me, that's my go-to. My first step is always energy work. It's always just focusing energy in that area and starting there to see what comes up.
Thank you. I have learned how to be sensitive to energy. So if you're at the point in your life where you don't understand or know much about energy work, or maybe you're interested and you want to learn more, I just want to attest to you, the audience, that this is something that's possible if you focus on it. If you don't want to focus on it and you want to leave that to the energetic professionals or coaches or healers, that's fine too, just like Yve said. Okay, so earlier you mentioned that you are a spiritual concierge. So how do you go into the spiritual aspect from the energy aspect in helping your clients?
Yeah. So for me personally, I would say that energy is very spiritual, right? So ultimately, I believe that when we connect to the divine or the God of our understanding, whoever, whatever that looks like for you. And for the record, I have clients of really every faith at this point, in every belief system. And what I found is that the most beautiful thing is when somebody has a God of their understanding or sense of the divine. And my clients that don't are the ones that almost sort of have to start from the ground up and sort of connect into that. And they almost always do it through energy work. So for me, becoming aware of the subtle energy in my body is a spiritual act. It's feeling myself connected to the divine that exists all around me. And whether you believe that literally, that everything is divine, or you believe that your creator created everything and thus there is a touch of divinity in it, right? But so for me, that's really the deeply spiritual part of that, is just feeling myself on that level, be connected to the things around me. So I would say that's kind of my first step. When we talk about spirit, we have to talk about, from a scientific perspective, what's left over. So after you identify, so let's say you're somebody who doesn't know, you don't know what you believe, or maybe you do know, or maybe you're questioning your faith and you're trying to come back to it, or you're trying to find ways to supplement it. I always tell people, your spirit is what's left over after you identify your physical self, your mental self, and your emotional self. So do that. Identify those three things, and then what's left over? That's where your spiritual self resides. And so a lot of times what I do, how I incorporate spirituality is I have my clients start there. Let's identify those parts of yourself that are the non-contested, right? Like nobody on earth is going to be like, I don't have a physical self. Well, no, you have a physical self. You have a mental self and you have an emotional self. So what's left over? So a lot of times that's kind of where we start. And then each client is so different, but that's a pretty common technique that I'll use.
That's a good one. Sometimes I remind my clients that even though they can't see the spiritual stuff or the energetic stuff, that it's still there. And I explain to them, there are some people who have phantom limb where their arm is gone for some reason, or their leg is gone, and yet they still feel like their arm is there or their leg is there, and they can feel the energy of that. And so scientists took a leaf. I read this in a few books, but I read an experiment where scientists took a leaf and they cut it in half and then they put it under a laser. And on the screen, they could see the physical leaf and then the energetic leaf matching what the missing part was. Within science, they have been able to prove that this energy stuff is real.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to remember, it was a Japanese scientist who did it initially, but it's the holograph experience is what it's called. And so essentially the parts of a living thing that you take, and this is true of human cells, if you take a human cell and you pass a laser through it, you actually see the whole of that cell. So even if you only take a part of it, you see the complete cell, and it's a holograph. It's not like a physical re-representation. It's just the energy imprint that's left, as you pass the laser through. So yeah, absolutely. And that's to speak nothing of the advances in quantum physics, which is going to get us totally off track here of where we're going. But yeah, absolutely, to think that the energetic side of things isn't real, I think is quite quickly becoming scientifically outdated. So
Yeah, exactly. So when somebody has ancestral trauma or they have trauma from an experience in their life, what do they do to release that or to process it? How does it work? What can our audience listeners do to apply this?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most powerful tools that we have is called self-reparenting. And so the idea of reparenting in general has been around since probably the 50s or 60s in its traditional format. And in the traditional format, the therapist would actually take on the role of a parent, and they would guide the client through scenarios where the client maybe didn't get the kind of parenting that they need. So they didn't have, either enough love or enough discipline or whatever was lacking. And the therapist would actually take on the role of the parent. Again, I believe that the more tools you're aware of, the better. I will say that my experience with a lot of my clients is that traditional reparenting hasn't worked. And so what I really use and what I really stand by is something called self-reparenting. And that got its start initially just on a very sort of mental level of going through and identifying your attachment styles, because attachment styles are going to help us figure out exactly which kind of traumas are driving our life based on what our attachment style is as an adult. And I can get into that a little bit more after this. You determine your attachment style. That's going to help you assess which traumas are really driving your life right now. And then once you have identified those, you create a plan to self-reparent. So you figure out how to create either more discipline or more love or more sense of play. That's a big one. A lot of my clients just missed out on a sense of play as children. You figure out how to recreate that. That's a super broad answer to your question. And what I will say is that I think it's a great place to start. And there are tools. If you Google self-reparenting, you'll find tools on how to do that. What I personally use with my clients is actually a technique of self-reparenting that I've created, which is based on meditation. And so I actually have a guided meditation program where I teach people how to self-reparent in this meditation. And I have yet to have a client who doesn't continue to use it years after they learn it, and it becomes a lot of people's favorite tool.
So what are the benefits of meditation?
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so glad you asked. This is my passion. So meditation is all it is. It's so simple. And it's one of those things that just has become so complex in our world today. It's such a shame that meditation has really become this really complex, complicated thing in our world today. You know, you have all of these tools and are you doing it right? And in reality, all meditation is it is a focused decision to change your state of mind. That's it. All it is saying, I'm going to use my intention to shift my attention to a different perspective. That's all meditation is. So the benefits of meditation, just there is no beginning or ending. You know, we see people practicing mindfulness meditation for 5 minutes a day consistently for 8 weeks, have an increase in the myelin sheath around their brain cells. The actual physiological improvements happen almost immediately. Quality of life goes up. People have a decrease in heart disease. They have a decrease in certain types of cancers. We see people who practice meditation in general are able to cope with change and disappointment better. So it makes you, in psychology, we call that resilience. It develops emotional resilience. Every benefit you can think of to meditation. And so that's why I love self-reparenting in meditation, because again, meditation is using our intention to focus our attention. And what I truly believe and what I teach is that our attention is the vessel in which alchemy happens. So everything that we need to transform has to be held inside the vessel of our attention. And that's what meditation is. Meditation is saying, here's my attention. I'm creating a vessel with it. And now I'm choosing to put this wound inside of it, and I'm going to transform it with self-reparenting. And I think that there's so much power behind that intention.
So you said intention, meaning what you choose to think about, and attention for what is your focus.
Yeah.
So you mentioned how meditation can help with like heart disease and cancer and all this stuff. Do those diseases come up in life because of our traumas?
There are definitely, I mean, you can't say that every time, for sure. You know, I mean, some people, not everybody who has heart disease, it has heart disease because they experienced a trauma. But what we do see is that there are biological effects of childhood trauma. And quite frankly, the instances of obesity, chronic pain syndromes, gastrointestinal disorders, immune dysregulation increases dramatically in child victims of trauma. Not to mention, you know, greater rates of psychopathology. So we're talking PTSD, depressions, disruptive behaviors, substance abuse disorders. All of these things increase when we experience traumas before the development of the amygdala. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's safe to say that when we experience too many traumas or too severe of traumas early in life, we have a greater propensity for a lot of those diseases, right? Certainly. Yeah, absolutely.
So in my practice, I am a reflexologist, and I have clients that come to me because they have a pain here or they have a problem there, and they realize how I go throughout my practice and how I address that. And they quickly notice that I go straight to the root cause. My understanding is that the root cause of most of the stuff we have going on is something emotional.
Right.
And that blows their mind. They're like, wait, what? And I have noticed just by addressing the emotional stuff that is going on, the physical stuff naturally takes care of itself a lot of the time. I mean, my husband had cancer. We did have to go through the whole medical route for that. And I'm so grateful for that. But I do believe and understand that there's a place for the medical world and there's a place for the metaphysical world, the healing world. If I can assist my clients with some of the emotional issues or traumas or experiences that they've had in their life, they will then go tell other people like, oh yeah, she fixed my fibromyalgia. And I was like, I didn't even know you had fibromyalgia. What are you talking about? Yeah. And that has been so fun for me. Have you experienced anything like that in your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you a story, and obviously I will change my client's name, but I had a client, she had basically had a botched surgery when she was in her 20s. When I was seeing her, she was in her 50s. She had a botched surgery when she was in her 20s on her shoulder. And what happened was there's actually a really big nerve in your, like right under your collarbone. And so when you break your collarbone, it's one of the things they worry about, right? Is like if you hit that nerve and you sever it, there's really nothing we can do about nerves. They either come back or they don't. And there's no science behind it. There's no medicine that can help it. It's kind of just like, well, fingers crossed that your nerve comes back and that it works the right way. And what's even worse is that sometimes the nerves come back and they come back wired the wrong way. So they only send pain signals. And that was the case with this woman. Was she had essentially been living in extreme levels of pain for 30 years. And we know that these levels were extreme because when they would test her blood, her cortisol levels would be like off the charts, which is what happens when your body, again, directed by the amygdala, triggered by the thalamus, tells you something hurts. I'm in pain. You should be scared. We get like this crazy increase in cortisol and adrenaline. And so we would see that in her blood over and over and over again. And the doctors literally couldn't do anything for her. They were like, all we can do is give you drugs because there's nerve pain and there's just nothing we can do about it. And she tried everything. She tried medicine, she tried physical therapy, she tried just all of like the medical things, and nothing was working. So she starts seeing me, and she's actually seeing me because at this point, again, I said I was seeing her in her 50s. Somebody in her family died, and she was just having a really hard time processing the death. And she's like, I don't know why, but for some reason, I just can't. I'm like, I can't move past this. So I was seeing her because she felt stuck in her life. That's how she described it. I feel stuck in my life because I can't move past this death. So as I started working with her, I realized that this is like her thing. Like her thing is that she just like holds on to these pain points in her life because she's like too afraid to let go of them. She had somehow created this reality for herself where as long as she was holding on to the pain, then she was in control of the world around her.
And that was emotional pain and physical pain?
Emotional, and what do you know? It turned out to be physical pain. So as we started doing the work to reparent the way that she was holding on to emotional pain, one day she woke up and her collarbone pain was totally gone. And she was just like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Like, I can't believe it. And I was like, it's not a miracle, actually. Like, it's just, this is how energy works. Like when we hold on to emotional energy, to emotional trauma, our body holds on to that too. And it finds places to store it, and you gave it the perfect little pocket here, like, so yes, I mean, I've seen it time and again that healing emotional pain and healing energetic pain. And I do make a little bit of a distinction between the two, that both of those things are very powerful in healing physical pain. Absolutely.
So how is that client doing? Are you done working with them, or are you still working with them?
So I have a strict rule with my clients. So I actually work with somebody for 1 year, and they can work with me every week throughout that year. And then at the end of the year, they're only allowed to see me twice a year. And the reason for that is that my goal and my mission and my purpose is to teach people tools to be able to care for themselves. I don't want somebody in my care for years and years and years. That's not what I want. I want to teach somebody how to be their own source of knowledge and their own source of healing. And so of course, like, a couple times a year, maybe you just need a refresher, you need a little boost, like great. But like, you don't just get to keep seeing me week after week after week for years. So I see her probably once a year. She's doing really great. She has new grandbabies. So you know how that is. She's like over the moon with her grandbabies. But the last time I saw her, no pain had come back, and she uses these tools every day, her reparenting tools. So yeah, she's doing great. And those are the stories that keep you going, and I'm sure you know that just from doing your work too. It's those stories that to these clients feel like a miracle, and you're just like preaching to the choir. Tell me more about it.
It's just science. Yes.
Right.
I love the results of those success stories because they're finally experiencing what you know and what you understand and what you can spiritually see or energetically see. I know a lot of people can't see auras, but I, for example, learned how to see somebody's aura, and that is definitely a spiritual gift or an energetic gift. And I love that with something I can see, people are witnessing the results. And that's just an example. I love that.
Oh, yeah. It's funny you say that. One of the things that I love to do for my clients is to teach them how to tap into those gifts, seeing auras or sensing auras. I've had people who can smell them. We all have these extra sensory gifts. And actually, I personally believe that children have tons of them and that we actually kind of teach our children not to have them over time. And so it's just like learning an instrument. Everybody can learn to play an instrument. Everybody can. Is it going to be easier for some people than others? Absolutely. Absolutely it is. But everybody can learn to do it. And so seeing auras, learning how to communicate with your ancestors or your spirits, or learning how to feel energy around you or how to perceive it, all of those things are things that can be learned. And that in and of itself, a lot of times will help people heal from trauma because it gives them such a sense of purpose and control in their life. I'm glad you brought that up because that is another tool that I think is really powerful for healing from past traumas, is that sense of control and power that we get when we realize that we can see the world beyond just what we're being told is there. I think that as we're talking about this idea of learning what gifts and graces we have access to beyond just the ones that traditional society is going to tell us that we have, that is a perfect way to begin to talk about this idea of micro and macro. What I mean by that is everything that is happening in the world around you, everything that is happening macrocosmically, everything that you are experiencing externally exists internally in the micro as well. A perfect example of this is if you are somebody who is struggling to find a partner or finds a mate that meets everything that you would want from a partner or a mate, and you really do the work and you take the time and you sit and you just honestly review the partners or the mates that you've been calling in, look for those patterns and you notice, I keep attracting partners who are not fully emotionally available. If you take that and you take it one step further out, and I always challenge my clients, I want you to look at your life. I want you to assess who in your life is not fully emotionally available for you, who has been in your life for a long time, because you learned that somewhere you saw that and you associated it with love. So where did you see it, right? So that's the macro. The macro says that we understand where we're at and we look bigger and we look for those patterns. And then the micro says that we do the exact opposite too, that we say, here's where I'm at. And now you go inside. In this instance, that means the micro means where are you emotionally unavailable for yourself, for your children, for your friends, for your parents. So understanding the micro and the macro is so powerful because it shows us exactly how expansive the universe is both within and without. There's this freedom when you say like, oh my gosh, this struggle that I have exists outside of myself. It exists in this pattern around me. And so no wonder I've taken this inside of me. And then once you identify that, you say, okay, where does this live inside of me? And once you identify where it lives inside of you, I mean, I would say 8 out of 10 times, that's enough to heal that right there. I mean, I have clients who, once they recognize that part of themselves, they're like, well, that's done. I'm not going to do that anymore.
So that's really interesting because in our part 1 of Healing Past Trauma, we talked about how once we experience a traumatic experience, sometimes the first thing that we wanted after that was to seek validation. Mm-hmm. So from what you were just saying, it sounds like our energy, our bodies, our spirits are wanting to seek that validation and just like, see me. Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm here. I'm shouting at you in my own special way. Right. And I love how we seek validation for healing physically and emotionally, and our bodies are wanting to seek that same validation. It's almost like, okay, I'm understood. I can now transform or move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this sort of interesting thing where we get addicted to the pain that is familiar. And so one of the things that's really scary for a lot of people is letting go of the trauma because they don't fully understand how much they're addicted to it. They don't realize like this is actually, it's biochemically an addiction. And the best way to explain this, and this will only resonate for some people because some people just don't experience this, but when you eat something spicy and you don't know why, but like you keep eating more of it and like your mouth is burning, but you just like literally can't stop eating it, But like a lot of us do this, right? Like a lot of us have this experience where we're just like, I don't know why, but like these spicy chips are so good. I'm just going to keep eating. But like you're like crying and you're like getting sweats and you're like, why am I doing this? Right? Like, but you're doing it because biochemically you're already addicted to the pain of that experience, because pain is stimulation. So to some extent you get serotonin and you get those fun oxytocin, those flashes of the good addictive hormones that make us think it's good, even though in reality what we're experiencing is pain. And so it's sort of the same thing with emotional trauma. When we have that emotional trauma triggered, our bodies learn over time that arousal, that stimulation of the pain is something to anticipate. It's something to look for. And so what we do is we get addicted to the anticipation of that pain trigger. And a lot of times we just have no idea. And so learning to understand that, learning to see that is also an incredibly powerful way just to start to move out of traumas, to be like, oh, okay, here's what's happening.
And a lot of times that pain is subconscious, right? Like a lot of people are thinking, no, I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to be in pain. What are you talking about? Yes. But it's subconscious. Our body is seeking something that it doesn't understand, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great point to clarify it's totally subconscious. I'm not going to say no one. I'm sure there's always an exception, but I would say very, very few to almost no people in the world are like, I want to be in pain right now, but our body, because it's seeking the thing that is familiar, it's seeking the known quantity of the anticipation of that pain. Absolutely. Yeah. It's the emotional trauma just becomes a tool for the body to try to reach us.
So how does someone recognize something that's triggering? Because I know a lot of people say, oh, that's a trigger for me. And they know either to avoid it or to address it. And they kind of have to be consciously aware of what they're doing to process that trigger. If somebody's holding hands in a movie, that could be a trigger for somebody that's watching, because holding hands may be connected to something that's not okay for them. Just as an example, how does somebody recognize what a trigger is and how they can transform that trigger so that they don't have that trigger anymore? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I think getting rid of triggers takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and it's just really committing to the process. But the first step is identifying triggers, which was sort of, I think, the first part of your question. A really good way to identify a trigger is any time that you are in a societally normative, non-threatening situation. And that means, would the majority of normal society consider this thing to be non-threatening? Right? And so you use the example of holding hands. Yes, most people in a normative society would not find seeing somebody hold hands to be threatening. Would the experience that you're reacting to be considered normal in society, and yet you are reacting to it? If the answer is yes, then it's a trigger. Another good way to identify a trigger, because sometimes you can't even identify that, right? Sometimes we just get so wrapped up in the trigger that we don't even know what the trigger was. A good way to know if you have been triggered is if your sense of time gets weird. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of clients who will say all of a sudden it felt like time was either slowing down. Everything got really slow, like painfully slow. And I felt like I was watching this fly buzz over this person's face for 30 minutes. And in reality, it was like a second. Or time gets really fast and people feel like they almost lose time. If you're having an experience like that, again, in an otherwise normal, societally normative situation, non-threatening, if it's a non-threatening normal situation and you have that experience, chances are something happened in that experience that was a trigger for you. And this is where the work comes in, right? Then the work from there is learning to sit quietly with yourself to figure out what that was. Or this is where you get help and you seek the help of a spiritual, energetic, or, mental health professional, and you allow them to help guide you through that. But I would say identifying triggers, those tend to be pretty big ones. And then physiologically, of course, anytime that you're in, again, a normal societal situation that is non-threatening, and you notice any change in your heart rate, your ability to breathe, how much you're sweating, if your stomach clenches, again, all of these things, your body is saying something's happening, and that is a trigger.
Okay, I love that clarification. I love that understanding. I know a lot of times when something triggering happens, we typically want to just avoid the situation altogether and we ignore it and we try to shove it down, like we mentioned in the part 1 of Healing Past Trauma episode, how can we go through this experience, like you said, sitting quietly with it and process it? Or when somebody else comes and helps us process it, is it a long process? Is it a short process? Like, what does it look like for a lot of your clients?
Yeah, I would say for a lot of my clients, it's a tricky question. I never want to speak ill of any tool. I will say that this is where I've really diverged from traditional talk therapy. And that's because I feel like with traditional talk therapy, they will take years sometimes to work through a trauma. Whereas I've worked with clients who've spent 5+ years in therapy and we've worked through the same trauma in a month. I really do truly believe that mindset matters. And I would hesitate to say, is it longer? Is it short? I think every trauma is different. Every person is different. But I would say that in general, we know that creating new neuronal pathways, especially when we're dealing with anything prefrontal cortex or like anything really early childhood, is going to take about 28 days to see a dramatic change. And that's just because that's about how long it takes our brain to actually make those new neuronal pathways and to get the grooves in those pathways deep enough to sort of like catch on. So I would say if you were expecting to be healed from a trauma in any time less than 1 month, that doesn't seem realistic to me. Can it happen? Absolutely. I've had people have spontaneous healings just from energy work where they never had to touch the trauma again. But I would say in general, expect at least a month.
I love that. I didn't know that it took 28 days to create a new neural pathway. I just knew that it was possible to create new neural pathways. I like knowing some sort of finite number. I like knowing and understanding the why with my brain. So thank you for giving me that number. And it is different for everybody. Like, it's not going to be, oh, here's your 28 days and you're done. Right. It's definitely, like you said, mindset matters. So how does somebody know when that healing process is, let's say, 75% completed or 100% completed?
So I want to clarify really fast. The new neuronal pathway will be developed immediately as soon as you have the experience. The trick with neuronal pathways is that they have to be deep enough in order for your brain to then start to follow that path. For your listeners, this is just really valuable. And I didn't understand this concept until I took a neurobiology class and they explained it's like, imagine a really soft pile of sand or of dirt. And imagine that every day there's a drop from above this pile of dirt and that drop lands in the same place. And so over time, it creates a really deep groove in the sand as it rolls down, right? Because the drop is in the same place over and over and over again. And then one day it rains, a super soft light rain, and the rain falls. So now you have all these new tracks in the sand. But those tracks are super light because it only rained the once. And so then if it rains again, not a lot of the rain is going to go in the new tracks because those tracks are super shallow. They're going to go to that deep groove that's been carved over time from that one drop going in the same place. So neuronal pathways work the same way. And it takes, in general, it takes about 28 days. And this is why they say it takes about a month to build a habit. It takes about 28 days for a new neuronal pathway to be deep enough to really have any substance for our brain to like put it to use.
So it takes that long to practice these tools,
right?
So that we can have those new habits, and they can be emotional habits, energetic habits, spiritual habits.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All of the above. So as far as identifying when you are sufficiently close to being healed of a trauma, right? I think a really good test for that, like basic test, is just heart rate. If you've ever sat with a heart rate variability monitor, it's pretty amazing what happens when we have even the slightest bit of uncertainty or fear or instability with a heart rate variability monitor. You'll actually see it immediately. Heart Math makes a great one. It's pretty affordable. What it does is it literally clip it to your ear and then it rests on your chest and it measures the spaces between your heartbeats. And what that tells us is the more consistent that the space is between your heartbeat. So the more smooth that pattern and that rhythm is, the more at rest your brain and your body are. When we're dealing with traumas, if you are even a little bit still triggered by that trauma, if you think about it while you're wearing one of these, or even just a blood pressure cuff, you will notice your blood pressure will go up, your heart rate variability will go up. So, I think that's a really great tangible way to see. Outside of that, emotionally, I would say, I call it poking the wound. We all do this and we do it from childhood. Like if you have kids or you've been around kids, you've seen how like if they get a scab, they just can't help but like pick at it or poke at it or like look under the Band-Aid. So we're the same way with emotional wounds and spiritual wounds. And so I would tell people, when you can poke that wound and you don't really react anymore, there's not like a big reaction. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, that's there. It's still there, but that wasn't so bad. I think that's a pretty good indication too. So it's just when your attention is holding that awareness, how do you feel?
By the way, I am learning so much. I have 3 pages of notes. Even though this is a language that I understand, this is just so fun for me. And I am like devouring everything that you're saying. And I'm wanting to search and seek and go deeper into a lot of the things that we've talked about, because I know that we've just nitpicked a few things here and there. So are there any last thoughts or words of wisdom or tools or anything that you want to mention to our audience before we go?
I feel like if there was one thing that I wanted to leave any and every audience, any and every client that I work with, it's that you are your own best doctor. You have every piece of wisdom and knowledge and healing and magic and power, and it lives inside of you. And there are so many beautiful ways to access that. And so if I could just leave the whole world with one message, it would be take the time to figure out how to access that and find people who can help you, but ultimately trust yourself. Trust your intuition, spend the time to sit quietly with yourself, to learn yourself, to understand that there is a true sanctuary and a true center of knowledge that lives inside each and every one of us. And that is ultimately the most powerful thing you can do, to know that truly and completely.
And not just for healing trauma, but for like every single day life.
Exactly, for everything. I'm so hopeful that with podcasts like these and just with sort of the awakening of the youth, I mean, I've never, I know most people my age are like, oh, the youths, I'm so concerned about what they're doing, but I'm not. I'm so hopeful, I see your generation, I see the generation after you, and I see these beautiful souls who really are, aware and awake. And so I have a lot of hope. So I hope that these things just become more and more mainstream, and hopefully in some small way I can contribute to that. You can always reach out to me. I have some blogs and a growing database of resources on my website.
Yeah. So what is your information so that people can contact you?
Yeah, so it's spiritualconcierge.me, and on there you'll see there's ways to reach out to me. There are blog posts. We have a resource page coming soon. I will also be releasing some journals. Check that page out. I'm always happy to connect with people. You can contact me directly through there. So always happy to receive emails, and my team is too. I have a lovely team of people who help field those. spiritualconcierge.me. I'm so grateful for the time and the space, Cherise. This has been so lovely.
Thank you. And really, thank you for being here. This has been full of so much information and knowledge and hope, because my intention with this topic was to give people the resources, or give them an idea of what resources could be, so that they can have access to a better way of living their life and not being stuck and stagnant forever, because that is such a deep and dark feeling. And I've been there before, and I don't want everybody to feel like that.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And I will leave all your information in the show notes of this podcast, so that if anybody forgets what you said, they can click in the show notes and go straight to your website. When you contact Yve, make sure that you mention this podcast, and you can get a 10% off discount when you have your consultation with her. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. If it resonates with you, the greatest compliment you could give is to share it with a friend who might benefit from it as well. Check out A Difference for One on Instagram for additional content. And if you have any questions, comments, a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you'd be interested in a free mini coaching session, send an email to adifferenceforone@gmail.com.